I hear a lot of people talking on TV, around in general, on the phone, when I'm discussing things with people, and raising questions about how come there seem to be not just so many socialists around, that's nothing unusual, but how come socialism suddenly seems to be okay for mainstream Democratic presidential candidates? I mean, being a socialist would have been something they would have run away from not that long ago, but now they seem to be embracing it. It's very widespread, and we see college students and faculty and politicians of all types on the left, of course, embracing socialism. And at the same time, I hear people talking about something else that is surprising them, and that's the rise of anti-Semitism on the left. Now, there's anti-Semitism on the right, to be sure, but there always has been. You expect there to be anti-Semitism on the right. You don't expect it to be coming from the left. And I know that surprises people, and I've had people ask me, what's going on? Why is that? What I think the people I see, the pundits on TV, don't seem to realize is that these two things, this embrace of socialism by leftist politicians and the seeming embrace of anti-Semitism by increasing numbers of leftist politicians, these two things aren't separate, aren't individual, aren't two aberrant behaviors that are developing. They are linked, and they are all rooted, they are all caused in the same thing. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. When I was a kid, when I was young, we had racism. Racism meant you had some white people who disliked black people and took it upon themselves as individuals or as lawmakers, as administrators, as whatever, to put roadblocks in front of black people, to make their life difficult. I mean, so they couldn't, in the South, you had legal segregation. I mean, they couldn't use restrooms. They couldn't use the same water fountain. They had to ride in the back of the bus. They had separate railroad cars. There were separate hotels for them. And this was still going on when I was growing up. And that was what we called racism. And what we needed to do is what the Civil Rights Acts were all about, was to pass laws to make that illegal. And then the belief was that would solve these problems. And we did that. And it did help. I'm not saying it didn't achieve anything. But we still had these obvious disparities. Now, you have to understand, progressives never recalibrate. Never look at what they're doing and say, gee, maybe this is a wrong approach. Whenever something doesn't work, what they do is double down. We need to push harder. We need more laws. We need more regulations. And of course, we need to spend more money. So that's what they did. And they just kept doing the same things, except they started to broaden it out. And they started going at the systems where they found these roadblocks, and they did this through analysis and statistics, what usually was thrown into the hopper of disparate impact. You had all these things happen, and blacks are 13%, but they don't show up as 13% of this. Ergo, something's wrong here. Somebody in this organization is holding blacks back. We can't pinpoint it. We can't find anybody who seems to be doing anything illegal, but we know it must be happening. So what we need to do is we need to push against this. So what that led us to, of course, was affirmative action. Well, we'll give them, special points and whatever you want to call the system to get people in there. If there's friction preventing them from moving through the system, we'll try to grease the wheels with affirmative action to give them advantages that'll make up for the disadvantages that obviously they must be getting hit with. And of course, you also had busing going on at the same time. So we sort of busing kids all over to try to get truly desegregated schools. Now, of course, while they were doing this, they were destroying schools. Not just they're destroying the white schools, they destroyed some of the black schools too that had good performance, and they were destroying all of them. And then you had white flight, and then you had to set up, people moving to private schools, and then the public schools become increasingly minority. And it just doesn't work. It's not working. But of course, what's the solution? More money, more busing. We just need to bus further. We need to expand the districts. And I pointed out in a post somewhere, we always talk about Finland. Finland has such wonderful schools. So I looked to see what do the Finns spend per student. What's per capita expenditure in Finland per student, K through 12? $7,000, which is about the same as North Carolina, which is considered for education not a very good state. New York City spends like $14,000 a student just for busing. Just for busing. And you have to wonder if they weren't busing the kids around. They just left them in schools, even if the schools were mostly black or mostly Hispanic. And they put the money into the schools and into better teachers and teacher salaries and everything. Would it achieve more than with what they're doing now? But that's another video. But that's the progressive mindset. More laws, more regulations, more money. Just keep pushing harder. And of course, none of that worked either. I mean, it worked in the sense that things got better, but they still didn't get the results they wanted. So they were still frustrated. Now, somewhere along the way, and I want to get too deep into all this stuff, somebody in a law school came up with this concept of critical race theory. Now, critical race theory is fairly complex, but to put it simply, the idea is that, the problem you have with African Americans ending up as a disproportionate population in our prisons isn't because, according to critical race theory, it's not because of their behavior. It's because the laws themselves are drawn up by white people. That the laws and the system, the judicial system, the legal justice system in this country is itself racist. So that's why you get these disparities. Nothing to do with, it's not caused by behavior. Yeah, I know, well, statistically, blacks commit more murders per person than whites, but mostly killing other black people, of course. But that's not the issue. The issue is the laws are set up to punish black people, basically, because it's a white legal justice system. Now, out of that, somewhere along the line, someone else came up with this, and these are all academics. All these things are happening on our universities, and if you're not on our universities, you wouldn't know these things. Well, somebody else came up with another theory, and this is what becomes known as intersectionality. Now, the idea is you have all these groups that are oppressed. You have blacks, Hispanics, Asians, gays, handicapped, women, Muslims, any other group you want to join that put in that list, that's fine. But so I didn't need to leave anybody out. I think I got most of them. And all these people have been looked at where they're all dealing with their individual systems that they deal with. And, if you're a white woman and you're in academia, you're dealing with an academic system that's, stacked against you. If you're a black construction worker, you're dealing with the union system that's stacked against you. Now, basically what intersectionality did, and different models, some use Venn diagrams, some use this one where you have all these individual problems in systems, and basically you roll them together, and the systems all intersect with the big system, the mega system, the mother of all systems. And it's this mega system, the big system, that's actually suppressing all these groups. So each of these, what in the past, people saw as individual struggles, the struggle for black civil rights, the struggle for women's equality, the struggle for LGBTQ rights, whatever. It's not, they're not individual struggles. They're one struggle against the system. Now, once you get to that point where there's a system, then all kinds of things follow from that, logically. Now, of course, logically in the sense that you're following the logic of a flawed theory developed by some academic who lives in a cocoon. But setting that aside, you have this system. So what does that mean? What do these individual groups have to do? Well, there's two things they have to do. The first is they have to cooperate. They have to band together. We don't hang separately. If we don't hang together, we're going to hang separately, which is a perfectly logical conclusion. We used that in the American Revolution for the colonies. We had to work together or we were going to die separately. So all these groups have to cooperate and coordinate. And what do they have to cooperate and coordinate with? Each other to do what? Change the system. What's the system? What's the big system that controls all these things? It's capitalism. Capitalism. And if you want to change the system, you have to get rid of capitalism. What are you going to replace capitalism with? Fascism? A chieftain? No, it's socialism. But socialism doesn't work. That doesn't matter. Are you a white supremacist? Because the system is set up in such a way to ensure white supremacy. If you don't want to change the system, then you must be a white supremacist. It doesn't matter that the system we're going to change it with doesn't work. That's irrelevant. For progressives, nothing works. What have they done that's actually worked? Busing? They throw money at things, they throw effort, but things don't necessarily change, at least not the way they want them. So they're going to change the system with socialism. So basically, if you accept intersectionality or you don't want to run up against it, you have to basically accept socialism. That we have to move toward socialism. And that's the problem, is that the system has to go. So you've got to be a socialist. If you're not a socialist, if you don't want to get rid of a socialist system, you're a racist. Because unless all these things are tackled together, you're not going to solve the problem. So you must be a racist. You must be a sexist. You must be a homophobe. You must be an Islamophobe. And we saw this just recently when Representative Omar made a anti-Semitic statement. And Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, actually had her people drew up this resolution condemning Omar by name. And Linda Sarsour, a Muslim feminist, I'll talk about that in a second, actually attacked Pelosi with this long list of things that was wrong about that, suggested what Pelosi should do, and said if Pelosi didn't do that, Pelosi was a white supremacist. And when I first read this, I thought, who the hell would think that Nancy Pelosi is a white supremacist? But it follows from intersectionality, because Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to have all these groups stick together with one another and doesn't want to bring down the system. She must be a white supremacist. So Nancy Pelosi caved, and she did basically exactly what Linda Sarsour asked her to do in that letter, and it didn't reprimand Omar at all. It made it a bigger statement against Islamophobia and homophobia and everything else. Useless nonsense. So that's why you see politicians today, they're running for president, and they think, yeah, socialism's okay. Because if they don't say socialism is okay, they're going to be labeled a homophobe or a racist or a sexist or a white supremacist. You've got to go with socialism. Otherwise, you're bucking this group mentality. Now, the other thing that plays into this gets back to the other point I started off with. Because all these groups have to hang together, they have to submerge their individual differences to fight the common fight. So, I mean, there are clear differences between, people come out and say Black Lives Matter, and somebody else says White Lives Matter. Well, you can't say White Lives Matter, because then you must be a white supremacist, because you have to stick with the Black Lives Matter group, because they're part of this intersectionality. If their position is only Black Lives Matter, that should be the position, then that's what you have to say. You can't say something else. If you do, you must be a white supremacist. You must be a racist. Women. women have, I mean, I'm sure there are people in the United States who look around the Islamic world and think, holy shit, I wouldn't want to live there. I don't want to have to wear a headscarf and all. But Linda Sarsour is part of this issue, Ilhan Omar and other people in the Muslim leadership. And you need to stick with that because of intersectionality. So even though, the leader of the women's movement in Iran is, she's facing 48 years in prison. She was just raped in prison, probably, because that's what they do with all the women there. And caned 150 lashes or something like that. Even though that's going on, well, we'll ignore that because the Muslims don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about who's going on over here. They want to talk about New Zealand. They don't want to talk about Iran. They don't want to talk about what's happening over there. They want to keep it focused here. And if you don't want to do that, you must be an Islamophobe. So the people in the women's movement have to look the other way when you have people coming into the movement from the Islamic side who really don't look like all that women's righties, you know what I'm saying. And the other issue, of course, is anti-Semitism. Now, you have groups in this intersectionality community who are anti-Semitic. There's groups on the African-American side, Farrakhan's, classic example. You've had others who've said anti-Semitic remarks over the years. I mean, there's this theme of anti-Semitism in the Black community that's always been there alongside the other theme of, gee, we all marched together with, Dr. King in the 60s. But it's there. This, they owned the stores. They were driven out of the communities. I saw when I was at Temple, where you had a Black community, one of the stores were owned by, had been owned for decades before the African Americans moved in by Jews, and they were driven out. And it happens today. You see that antipathy toward Asians, Korean grocers, Asians, East Asians, South Asians, whoever they are in the Black community, because these are people who open the stores where they live, and they feel like they should have the stores where they live. And in some ways they should, but why don't they? But that's another issue. So you also have the Islamic side. And let's face it, in the Islamic world, I'm not saying every Muslim is an anti-Semite, but most Muslims are, at the minimum, very anti-Israel. And beyond that, they're for BDS, which is borderline anti-Semitism, and some are just for outright anti-Semitism. We just saw that with Ilhan Omar. We've seen that with Farrakhan. But you can't criticize them. You can't criticize the anti-Semites among these groups, because then you must be a white supremacist. Because under the rules of intersectionality, we all have to stick together. We all have to look the other way when the other party's doing things that we don't like. And we all have to forge ahead to bring down the system. So what you see on the left now is basically, as I've said it, the cover charge of being a progressive today is to become, at least to accept anti-Semitism, if not to practice it yourself. And that's why if you look at where the biggest increases of anti-Semitism came in this country, over the last couple of years, there was the 2017 Anti-Defamation League, Jewish Anti-Defamation League report. It's always cited in headlines. Big jump in anti-Semitic acts in calendar year 2017 in the United States. And it's true, there were. But if you actually read the report, which I think most of these reporters never did, but I've read it twice, and you go through the report and you look, yeah, there's a big jump. Statistically, there's like a 50% jump in 1 year in anti-Semitic acts. But what drove that? Right-wing terrorism? No. 100% increase in anti-Semitic acts on college campuses. Now, college campuses are hardly the holdouts of right-wing America, especially the college campuses in Columbia and these other places. That's where you see a rise in anti-Semitism. It's from the BDS groups, the pro-Palestinian groups. They get the students involved. You get them into intersectionality, And they're being taught this in their classes. I mean, I see passing references to it in email communications between administrators. They just accept it. Well, you know, as intersectionality demonstrates, we need to do A, B, C, D, and E. I mean, there's not even an argument if intersectionality exists or if it's more than a theory. It's just accepted. It's thrown out there and it's accepted. And if you don't accept it, you're a white supremacist. So you got to accept it. You got to go along with it. And people are talking about it in school, and the kids are picking it up. Yeah. So basically, I need to be a socialist anti-Semite when I grow up, when I get out of college, and that's what's happening. I got to stick with my Muslim brothers. You know, Palestine from the river to the sea. You know, we got to get rid of Israel. Oh well, you know, the Jews will still be there. They'll just, you know, they'll live happily under Sharia, second-class citizens. You know, it'll be a wonderful existence. They can trust the Muslims, you know, to treat them well, and give them rights, I'm sure. But that's where you're getting. And you know, as an academic, I've seen this. I've seen over the years. I remember in the 80s, there was a guy I knew. He was a full professor of history at George Mason. I won't mention his name, and he's probably retired, but he may not be. And we always had these arguments about that. We talk a lot about military events and current events. And one place we'd agree on a lot of stuff, but we disagree usually when it came to Israel. And one day, I forget what the Israelis had done. And he said, oh, yeah, damned Israelis. And I said, no, that was the Israelis. I do the same thing. I would have done it, you know, bigger. I thought they were holding back. And we had the speaker was delayed, so we kept drinking, and we'd had more than the usual amount to drink, and we were both a little tipsy. And all of a sudden, he stopped saying Israelis, and he started saying Jews. The Jews, this, we gotta get, the only way we'll get peace in the Middle is to get rid of all the goddamn Jews. The Jews here. And I was like, oh, you know, I don't believe this. There's actually are anti-Semites out there. I always, you know, heard about anti-Semites in academia. I'd never actually run across one. And then I got to ECU, and there was a professor, and I heard from different people, he's an anti-Semite. I said, nah, you know. But I guess it was 1980 when Al Gore was running, and he put Joe Lieberman on the ticket as vice president. And I was coming out of a guy's office, and he said, so how are you voting this year, Michael? And I said, well, you know me, I'm a registered Republican, so I'm going to, you know, vote for Bush. Well, I think you're going to have my vote this time. I usually vote Democrat, but I think I'm voting for Bush this time. I said, hey, great. He said, yeah, I don't want one of those people anywhere near the White House. I said, what do you mean, like Gore? Because he's close to the Clintons? No. Those people. You know who I'm talking about. Those people. And I feel, oh, he's talking about Joe Lieberman, who's Jewish. So he's going to vote Republican. He's going to vote for Bush because Lieberman's on the ticket. Lieberman's a Jew, and he doesn't like Jews. I thought, wow, the things people were telling me about him is true. The guy is an anti-Semite. And then the worst case was, it was after I had moved to Tampa. They had a conference at USF. It must have been 2014 or 2015. I can't remember now. I don't remember the names of the people or the schools they went to. But it was, get this, it was a conference on genocide. All right. And I went to some of the panels, and there weren't any panels I liked for this one period. So I went to the lounge, and they had, you know, coffee and orange juice and bagels or something. And I figured I'd hang out there until, you know, whatever. And there were two people talking, and they were there was an African American, a white woman. They were both Americans. They weren't like it wasn't like an African American from Africa. He was, you know, homegrown. And the white woman wasn't from some, you know, Egypt or something. She was an American. And I forget the schools. They were good schools. And so I sort of moseyed over to get some coffee and see what they were talking about. I thought maybe I could, you know, join the conversation because I was bored. And they were talking about arguments to justify wiping out all the Jews in the world. You know, remember, I'm at a conference on genocide, and here you have two academics, American academics, talking about The only way you can solve the problems in the Middle East is get rid of all the Jews. And the only way you can get rid of all the Jews in the Middle East is get rid of all the Jews here, because they're not going to let you do it otherwise. And I was, you know, I didn't know I'm not going to join this conversation, but I kept listening as I'm, you know, stirring my coffee and playing around with a bagel or something. And they started trading stories or tips on how to fend off students who say it's wrong to kill all the Jews, that that's genocide. And the white woman says, my favorite is, the students always say, but professor, if we killed all the Jews, we wouldn't have had an Einstein. And I always tell them, yeah, what do you tell them? He asks. And she says, well, what I tell them is, if we killed all the Jews, there'd be a lot of non-Jewish Einsteins. That the Jews don't let the non-Jewish Einsteins rise to the top, because they control everything themselves. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. And then he started telling some of the things, you know, that he fends off these students who don't want to commit genocide. And I said, oh my God, we're at a conference on genocide, and here are two American academics talking about genocide, advocating genocide, defending genocide. And from their arguments, it was very clear that these were issues. I don't know what courses they taught. Could have been literature. I don't know what it was. But whatever courses they were teaching, they were telling their students that the only way to solve a problem in the Middle East and give justice to the Palestinians was to wipe out all the Jews. And to wipe out the Jews there, you'd have to wipe out the Jews here too. That's what they were teaching their students. So to say, you know, so do you wonder why the ADL report says this is 100% increase in anti-Semitism in our college campuses? That's why. How many other people are out there doing that? You know, I have no idea. When I teach a course in the U.S. and the Middle East, I usually have on average 15 students. I usually get one who is either overtly or borderline an anti-Semite. And these are kids coming out of high schools and colleges. And you can tell from the stuff they're reading and the things that they're referencing that somebody had to teach them this. You know, maybe it was their parents. Maybe they were raised in an anti-Semitic family. I don't know. But I doubt it. I mean, usually I can sort of tell from my students what they've been taught by how they approach issues. How do they approach the Electoral College? How do they approach the Declaration of Independence? How do they approach this? And you can see how far left their instruction's been by the things that they say, the issues they raise, the sources they cite, the magazines they reference. And, you know, I usually get one. I teach this course once a year, and I usually get at least one student who is there or close to it. So I know that this stuff is going on our college campuses, and right now it's getting worse because of this intersectionality. Because if you're not anti-Israel, if you're not pro-Palestinian, if you're not for BDS, you must be a white supremacist, and that's where we're headed. You're going to have to be BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. And that's just the first step. The next step is going to be Israel's got to go. And then to get Israel to go, you're going to have to get rid of the Jews. And that's where we're headed. And that's what we're seeing out there. We're seeing this stuff. And it's coming from our universities. Both critical race theory was developed in a law school on an American campus. And intersectionality, again, came out not out of a law school, but out of American college campuses. And it's being spread and taught to all the kids who are going in there. And it's not that they get it in every class. When I was in school, I started in '69. I graduated in '73. Not every professor I had was an overt Marxist, but several of them were. You know, I had one in English, I had one in geology, and I had two in history. And you know, that's between them. I guess I had 5 courses, and I took, I don't know how many you take in college, 10 a year, or so you take 40 courses. That's 1/8 of what I taught was taught by Marxists, and it did influence me. I mean, it did influence me by the time I got out of school, I was pretty far to the left. I wrote, one of my first big paper I wrote in graduate school was basically a defense of Stalin. And it was the professor who took me aside and said, "Are you crazy? Where do you get this crap?" And he said, the first volume of, it was 74 when I started graduate, first volume of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago had come out. He said, "Read it." And I did, and it opened my eyes. I started to rethink things, and I started to go back and look at things. So I know that these people are influencing students today, and that's why you see the students are so, yeah, socialism. We're all for socialism. You're telling the kids, do you want to be a white supremacist? No, I don't want to be a white supremacist. Then you have to, embrace intersectionality, and you have to stick together with all these groups, and you're going to have to be an anti-Semite, and you're going to have to be a socialist. If you're not a socialist, you're a white supremacist. If you are against anti-Semitism, or at least anti-Zionism, anti-Israel policies, you're a white supremacist. And that's how Nancy Pelosi, because she wanted to go after Omar, became, in Linda Sarsour's eyes, a white supremacist. And I'm sure a lot of people are scratching their heads. How do you get from A to B? But that's how. It's very simple, because you're either a white supremacist or you're not. So that's the thing today. Do you want to be in intersectionality? Do you want to be, do you want to fight with the group? Do you want to hang with the women? Do you want to hang with the gay people? Yeah, I know. Well, gays have problems in the United States, but would you rather be here or in Iran or Saudi Arabia or basically any other Muslim country? How about Brunei? You want to be in Brunei right now if you're gay? But you might think that, this country is the worst place in the world. And the whole concept of gay rights and women's rights and equality all comes out of Western culture. And the problem is they're destroying Western culture, the progressives. And they're destroying the very culture that protects them. And when they're done destroying it, there'll be nothing to protect them. And they'll end up reaping the whirlwind that they've sown. So that's what's going on right now. It's intersectionality. You have to be a socialist. You have to be an anti-Semite. And if you're not, you're a white supremacist. So that by that definition, that's why it's so, why do they call everybody racist? You drop your hat, you're a racist, you're a racist, you're a white supremacist. How did Nancy Pelosi get to be called a white supremacist? This is how. It's all linked to this intersectionality. And unless you understand that, and if you're not living on college campuses, you wouldn't. It's there. How do you defeat that? How do you combat that? These people run the campuses now. They run the campuses. And like I said, it's not every professor who's teaching every kid, but you don't need every professor to teach every kid. Like I said, about 1 out of 8 of my teachers were teaching me, but that was enough. They got me and they got everybody else who went through those classes, and it did influence me. That's how I know how these kids can be influenced, because I was influenced. And the only reason I got out of that mindset was I went into graduate study and I kept digging deeper. If I had just graduated and gone off, I probably never would have changed. But that's what's happened to these kids. They graduate for the most part, and then they go out into life, and all they know is this socialism. It says, I want to be fair and I want to be equal. Just don't. I don't want to share my grades. I just want to share your income. Anyway, hopefully this will make some sense out of these seemingly two separate things you're seeing, and you realize that they are connected, why they're connected, how they're connected.